The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor of the Overlook House reception hall. But the sound was nothing compared to the silence that followed Patricia Martinez's announcement. She stood there, microphone in hand, her pearl necklace catching the amber light from the chandeliers, and repeated the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. I give this marriage 6 months, maybe less. 75 guests stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and morbid curiosity. My new husband David looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face drained of all color. This was supposed to be our celebration, the beginning of our life together, and his mother had just delivered what felt like a public execution. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya Chen, and 6 months before that devastating wedding reception, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 28, living in a cozy craftsman house in Portland's Hawthorne district with David, the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years earlier over coffee and philosophy discussions at Powell's Books. He taught middle school history with the kind of passion that made 12-year-olds actually care about the Revolutionary War, and I worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company downtown. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, stable, building something real together. The problem began when I made what Patricia would later call the most selfish decision of your adult life. I quit my corporate job to start my own graphic design business. It wasn't a reckless impulse. I'd been planning it for over a year, saving money, building a portfolio, taking on small freelance projects in my spare time. The corporate world felt like wearing shoes that were 2 sizes too small, functional, but slowly crushing my spirit. Every morning, I'd sit in those sterile conference rooms, designing marketing materials for products I didn't care about, watching the clock tick toward 5:30 like I was serving a prison sentence. The breaking point came during a particularly soul-crushing meeting about rebranding our client's line of industrial cleaning supplies. My boss, a man who wore the same gray suit every Tuesday and had never created anything more artistic than a PowerPoint presentation, looked at my concept designs and said, "Make them more corporate, less creative. We don't want to confuse people with too much personality." That night, I came home to find David grading papers at our kitchen table, red pen in hand, completely absorbed in his students' essays about local history. He looked up when I walked in, and something in my expression must have given me away because he immediately set down his pen. "Rough day?" he asked, but he already knew the answer. I sat down across from him, pushed aside a stack of worksheets about the Oregon Trail, and said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. "I want to quit my job." David didn't panic. He didn't lecture me about financial security or ask if I'd lost my mind. He just nodded slowly and said, "Tell me your plan." So I did. I spread out my laptop, showed him the client work I'd been building, the business plan I'd drafted, the modest savings account I'd been contributing to for months. I explained how I could work from our spare bedroom, how I'd already connected with several small businesses in Portland who needed branding help, how this felt like the first decision I'd made in years that actually belonged to me. "It's scary," I admitted, "but staying where I am feels scarier, like I'm slowly disappearing." David reached across the table and took my hand. "Then let's do it." That was David, steady, supportive, the kind of person who believed in taking calculated risks for the right reasons. He understood that sometimes safety isn't actually safe if it's killing you slowly from the inside. His mother, however, had a dramatically different perspective. The phone call came 3 days after I'd submitted my resignation. I was in our spare bedroom, already mentally arranging my new office space, when David answered his cell in the living room. Even through the closed door, I could hear Patricia's voice escalating in pitch and volume. Words like irresponsible and financial suicide and "what were you thinking?" drifted through the walls like smoke. When David finally hung up 20 minutes later, he looked exhausted. She wants to talk to you," he said quietly. Patricia Martinez had never been what you'd call warm toward me, but she'd maintained a veneer of polite civility during the 3 years David and I had been together. She was a retired bank manager from Phoenix, a woman who'd built her identity around stability, predictability, and proper appearances. She wore her silver hair in the same neat bob she'd had for 15 years, drove a pristine white Camry, and had opinions about everything from proper table settings to appropriate career choices for young women. The fact that her only son had fallen in love with someone who wanted to leave a perfectly good corporate job to play artist, as she put it, violated every principle she held dear. "Maya, dear," she said when I called her back, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that made my teeth ache. "David tells me you've made some interesting career decisions." I tried to explain my reasoning, the same careful logic I'd shared with David, but Patricia interrupted before I could finish my second sentence. "Graphic design isn't a career, it's a hobby, and hobbies don't pay mortgages." Her voice grew sharper. "David works hard for his money, and now you're expecting him to support both of you while you pursue your little creative projects? That's not what's happening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a business plan, clients already lined up, savings to cover the transition period." "Oh, sweetie." The condescension in her tone made my stomach clench. "Do you know how many people think they can make it as freelancers? Do you know how many of them end up crawling back to their old jobs within 6 months, if they're lucky enough to get them back?" The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Patricia systematically dismantling every aspect of my plan. According to her, I was naive, selfish, and completely unprepared for the realities of running a business. She questioned my financial literacy, my work ethic, and my commitment to David's well-being. By the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been put through a paper shredder. David found me sitting on our back porch afterward, staring at the neighbor's garden without really seeing it. "She thinks I'm going to ruin your life," I said without looking at him. "She thinks a lot of things," David replied, settling into the chair beside me. "Most of them are wrong." "What if she's right, though? What if I can't make this work? What if I'm being selfish and irresponsible and all the other things she said?" David was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic on Hawthorne Boulevard, the ordinary noise of people going about their evening routines. Finally, he spoke. "My mom has been afraid of change her entire life. She married my dad straight out of college, worked at the same bank for 35 years, lived in the same house since 1987. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the only way to live." He reached over and took my hand. "She's terrified that I might choose differently than she did, and she's taking that fear out on you. But what if I fail? Then you'll figure out what comes next. But Maya, what if you succeed?" I quit my job the following week. The transition wasn't seamless. Freelancing never is. But it wasn't the disaster Patricia had predicted either. I converted our spare bedroom into an office, complete with a second-hand desk from Craigslist and a bulletin board covered in color swatches and typography samples. My first real client was a local brewery called Cascade Hops, owned by a soft-spoken man named Mr. Thompson who wanted help rebranding his taproom to attract a younger crowd. The project took me 3 weeks and paid enough to cover 2 months of groceries. More importantly, it reminded me why I'd fallen in love with design in the first place. There's something magical about taking someone's vision and translating it into something visual, something that communicates who they are and what they care about without using words. Patricia, however, remained unimpressed. During our weekly family phone calls, she'd ask pointed questions about my little business, always with air quotes I could hear through the phone. She'd inquire about my income with the persistence of an IRS auditor and offer unsolicited advice about realistic backup plans. "I'm just concerned about David's future," she'd say whenever I tried to change the subject. He's such a good man, and he deserves security. The implication was always clear. I wasn't providing that security. I was a risk, a liability, a potential source of financial ruin for her precious son. As our wedding date approached, Patricia's criticism became more frequent and more pointed. She questioned every detail of our relatively modest celebration, from the venue we'd chosen to the fact that we weren't hiring a full catering service. She made it clear that she thought we were being cheap and irresponsible, throwing money we didn't have at a party we couldn't afford. "If you were still working at that nice corporate job," she said during one particularly painful phone conversation, "you could afford to do this properly." The morning of our wedding, I woke up in our bedroom surrounded by the organized chaos of final preparations. My dress hung on the closet door, a simple but elegant cream-colored gown I'd found at a boutique in the Pearl District. Jenna, my best friend and our wedding photographer, was already downstairs making coffee and probably stress-eating the pastries she'd brought from her favorite bakery. I should have been nervous about the ceremony, about the vows I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, about whether the weather would hold for our garden ceremony. Instead, I found myself thinking about Patricia and the expression she'd worn during the rehearsal dinner the night before. She'd smiled and nodded in all the right places, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy, like she was storing up ammunition for a battle I didn't know we were fighting. "You're overthinking," Jenna called from the kitchen when she heard me moving around upstairs. "Get down here and eat something before you pass out during your own wedding." Jenna Williams had been my closest friend since college, the kind of person who showed up with chocolate and wine after bad breakups and celebrated every small victory like it was a major holiday. She'd built a successful photography business over the past 5 years, specializing in weddings and portraits, and she understood the particular challenges of creative entrepreneurship in ways that most people didn't. "How are you feeling?" she asked when I finally made it downstairs, still in my pajamas with my hair in a messy bun. "Like I'm about to marry the love of my life in front of 75 people, including a mother-in-law who thinks I'm a gold-digging failure," I said, accepting the coffee she handed me. "Patricia's going to Patricia," Jenna said with a shrug. "But everyone else is here because they love you and David and want to celebrate with you. Focus on that." She was right, of course. The guest list was filled with people who mattered to us, David's teaching colleagues, my college friends, neighbors from our street who'd become like family, clients who'd become friends. These were people who knew us, who understood what we were building together, who supported our choices even when they didn't fully understand them. The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped it would be. We exchanged vows in the garden behind, the Overlook House, with Mount Hood visible in the distance and late afternoon sunlight filtering through the Douglas fir trees. David's hand shook slightly when he slipped the ring onto my finger, and I'm pretty sure I forgot to breathe during the entire exchange. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," the cheer from our guests was so enthusiastic that it startled a family of crows from the nearby trees. Patricia sat in the front row throughout the ceremony, wearing a navy blue dress and an expression that I couldn't quite read. She applauded at the appropriate moments and dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but something about her posture seemed tense, like she was bracing herself for something. The reception began smoothly enough. Cocktail hour flowed seamlessly into dinner, with guests mingling between the garden and the indoor reception hall. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and David and I managed to steal a few quiet moments together between rounds of table visits and photo sessions. It was during the toasts that everything went sideways. We'd planned for a few short speeches during dinner, David's brother Miguel calling in from Denver via video chat, my sister Lisa sharing some embarrassing childhood stories, and Jenna offering her perspective on our relationship. The last slot was reserved for family remarks, and Patricia had volunteered to represent David's side of the family. She stood up gracefully, smoothing down her dress and accepting the microphone from our DJ with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The room quieted down, guests turning their attention to the woman who was about to welcome me officially into the Martinez family. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate David and Maya," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the reception hall. "As David's mother, I've watched him grow into the wonderful man he is today, and I've always wanted nothing but happiness for him. So far, so good." I relaxed slightly in my chair, reaching over to squeeze David's hand under the table. "Marriage is a serious commitment," Patricia continued, "and it requires careful consideration, mutual respect, and above all, stability." Her eyes found mine across the room, and something cold settled in my stomach. It's important that both partners contribute equally to the relationship, that neither person becomes a burden to the other. David tensed beside me. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this wasn't going in the direction of a typical wedding toast. "I've seen too many marriages fail because one person made selfish decisions that put the entire family at risk," Patricia said, her voice growing stronger and more pointed with each word. "When someone abandons financial security to chase unrealistic dreams, when someone expects their spouse to carry the financial burden alone, when someone prioritizes their own desires over their family's stability." She paused, and in that moment of silence, I realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't a toast. This was a public indictment. "I love my son too much to pretend that I think this will work." Her voice carried to every corner of the room, each word landing like a physical blow. "Maya seems like a lovely girl, but lovely doesn't pay the bills. Good intentions don't make up for poor judgment. And I'm afraid that what I'm seeing here is a recipe for disaster." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the distant hum of the air conditioning, someone's fork clinking against their plate. David's face had gone completely white, and I could see Jenna half rising from her chair at the photographer's table, her camera forgotten in her lap. "I give this marriage 6 months," Patricia concluded, her voice steady and matter-of-fact, like she was delivering a weather report. "Maybe less." That's when my champagne glass slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the floor in a shower of crystal and golden liquid. The sound of crystal hitting hardwood seemed to snap everyone back to reality. Conversations resumed in hushed, uncomfortable whispers as guests tried to process what had just happened. A server appeared with a small broom and dustpan, quietly, cleaning up the mess while avoiding eye contact with anyone at our table. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to comprehend that my new mother-in-law had just publicly predicted the failure of my marriage during what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. David finally found his voice, standing up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor with a harsh screech. "Mom, what the hell was that?" His voice carried across the reception hall, and several more conversations stopped mid-sentence. Patricia handed the microphone back to our DJ with a serene smile, as if she'd just delivered a heartfelt blessing instead of a character assassination. "I was simply being honest, David. Someone needed to say what everyone else is thinking." "No one else is thinking that," David said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You just humiliated my wife in front of our entire wedding party." "Your wife made her own choices," Patricia replied, her tone maddeningly calm. "I'm simply pointing out the likely consequences." I finally managed to stand up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath the flowing fabric of my wedding dress. The reception hall suddenly felt too small, too warm, filled with too many eyes and too much pity. I needed air, space, somewhere to think without 75 people watching my every reaction. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned toward the door that led to the garden, desperate to escape the suffocating attention. Jenna intercepted me before I could make it outside, her camera bag slung over her shoulder and her expression fierce with protective anger. "Maya, wait! Don't let her chase you away from your own reception. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I can't stand there and pretend everything is fine while people whisper about whether my marriage is doomed before it even starts. Then don't pretend, Jenna said firmly. But don't run either. This is your day, your celebration. Don't let Patricia steal that from you. Behind us, I could hear David's voice rising as he continued to argue with his mother. Other family members were starting to get involved, with Miguel's voice crackling through the video call setup, and my sister Lisa approaching the family table with the determined expression of someone about to mediate a diplomatic crisis. She's not wrong, though, I said quietly, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me for months. What if I can't make the business work? What if I really am being selfish and irresponsible? What if David ends up resenting me for putting us in a difficult financial position? Jenna grabbed my shoulders and turned me to face her directly. Maya Chen, listen to me. I've been running my own business for 5 years. I've seen the struggles, the uncertainty, the late nights, and the lean months. I've also seen what happens when someone has real talent and the determination to make it work. You have both. But what if nothing? Jenna cut me off. Patricia just revealed more about herself than she did about you. She stood up in front of your friends and family and showed everyone exactly who she is. Don't let her insecurity become your truth. Before I could respond, David appeared at my side, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Maya, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was planning to do that. Where is she now? I asked, glancing back toward the reception hall. Holding court near the bar, telling anyone who will listen about the financial realities of modern marriage, David said, his voice dripping with disgust. My own mother turned our wedding reception into her personal platform for airing grievances about our life choices. The three of us stood there in the garden entrance, caught between the celebration we'd planned and the disaster it had become. Through the windows, I could see our guests milling around awkwardly, some people leaving early while others seemed to be gathering in small groups to discuss what they'd just witnessed. We have 2 choices, I said finally, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. We can let this ruin our entire wedding day, or we can decide that Patricia's opinion doesn't get to define our marriage. David looked at me with something like admiration. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and made a decision that would shape how I handled conflict for the rest of my marriage. I want to go back in there and dance with my husband. I want to thank the people who came here to celebrate with us. And I want to show Patricia that her prediction doesn't scare me. Are you sure? Jenna asked. Because we can absolutely tell people the reception is over and get you 2 out of here. I'm sure, I said, though my hands were still shaking slightly. This is our wedding day. I'm not letting anyone take that away from us. We walked back into the reception hall together, and I was surprised to find that most of our guests were still there. A few people had left, probably more out of secondhand embarrassment than any judgment about our marriage, but the majority of our friends and family had decided to stay. Several people approached us immediately, offering hugs and quiet words of support. That was completely inappropriate, said Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to me over the past few years. Your marriage is your business, not hers. Mr. Thompson, my brewery client, appeared at my elbow with a fresh glass of champagne. Maya, I've been in business for 25 years, and I can tell you that some of the most successful people I know started with nothing but determination and a willingness to work hard. Don't let anyone tell you that following your passion is a mistake. Even some of David's teaching colleagues made a point of coming over to express their support. We've seen how hard you both work, said Janet, a fellow history teacher who had become a close friend. Anyone who knows you knows that you're building something solid together. The warmth and support from our actual friends and family created a protective buffer around the humiliation Patricia had tried to inflict. Still, I was acutely aware of her presence on the other side of the room, surrounded by a small group of relatives who seemed to be listening intently to whatever explanation she was offering for her earlier behavior. "Should we go over there?" David asked, following my gaze. "Should I try to make her apologize?" "No," I said firmly. "An apology that has to be forced isn't really an apology. Let her dig her own hole." Instead, we focused on the people who had chosen to stay and celebrate with us. We cut the cake, which was a beautiful 3-layer creation from a local bakery that specialized in organic ingredients. We had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I managed to forget about Patricia's prediction for the few minutes we were lost in the music and each other's arms. During the dance, David whispered in my ear, "I love you and I believe in us. I believe in what we're building together." "Even when it's scary?" I whispered back. "Especially when it's scary." The reception wound down naturally over the next few hours. Patricia left early, making a production of saying goodbye to family members while pointedly avoiding any interaction with David or me. She hugged Miguel's video call screen and promised to call him soon, kissed David stiffly on the cheek without meeting his eyes, and walked out of the reception hall without acknowledging my existence. "Well," said my sister Lisa, watching Patricia's departure with raised eyebrows. "That was something." "That's one word for it," David replied grimly. By the time the last guests had departed and the venue staff had finished cleaning up, it was nearly midnight. Jenna had stayed to help pack up decorations and gifts, and she pulled me aside before leaving. "I got everything on camera," she said quietly. "The whole speech, the aftermath, all of it. I wasn't sure if you'd want the footage, but I thought, you should know it exists." I considered this for a moment. Part of me wanted to forget the entire incident, to pretend it had never happened and move forward without dwelling on the humiliation. But another part of me recognized that Patricia's behavior had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Keep the footage," I said finally. "I might want to see it later." "And Maya?" Jenna squeezed my hand. "For what it's worth, I think you handled tonight with more grace than Patricia deserved. She showed everyone who she really is, and you showed everyone who you really are. I know which impression is going to last." David and I drove home in relative silence, both of us emotionally exhausted by the events of the day. Our house felt different when we walked through the front door, transformed by the simple fact that we were now officially married despite the drama that had accompanied the transition. "So," David said as we stood in our living room, still in our wedding clothes. "That happened." "That happened," I agreed. "Are you okay?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. "I'm hurt," I said finally. "I'm embarrassed that it happened in front of everyone we care about. I'm angry that your mother chose our wedding day to make a public statement about her disapproval of our marriage. But I'm not broken by it." David nodded slowly. "I'm furious. With her. I've been making excuses for her behavior for years, telling myself that she means well and that she's just worried about my future. But what she did tonight was cruel and calculated. What are we going to do about it?" "I don't know yet," David admitted. "But I know that I'm not going to let her treat you that way again. And I'm not going to let her prediction become a self-fulfilling prophecy." Over the next few days, we received calls and messages from wedding guests expressing their support and sharing their own thoughts about Patricia's behavior. The consensus was clear. What she had done was inappropriate, hurtful, and completely out of line. Several people mentioned that they had been impressed by how we had handled the situation, refusing to let it completely derail our celebration. But Patricia's words had planted a seed of doubt that I found difficult to ignore. 6 months. That was her prediction. As I returned to my freelance work and tried to build my business, that timeline loomed in my mind like a countdown timer. Every small setback, every late payment from a client, every moment of financial uncertainty felt like evidence that she might be right. The pressure was intensified by the fact that Patricia seemed to be waiting for validation of her prediction. She would call David regularly, asking pointed questions about our finances and my business progress. She never asked to speak to me directly, but her messages came through loud and clear through David's increasingly tense phone conversations with her. "She wants to know if you're making enough money yet to contribute to the mortgage," David would report after these calls, his jaw tight with frustration. "She thinks you should consider going back to corporate work while you still can." She heard from someone that most small businesses fail within the first year. Each reported conversation felt like another small cut, another reminder that Patricia was actively rooting for my failure. It became increasingly difficult to focus on building my business when I knew that every struggle I faced would be interpreted as evidence of her superior wisdom. 2 months after our wedding, I faced my first real business crisis. Mr. Thompson, my brewery client, had to postpone a major rebranding project due to unexpected equipment repairs. Another client, a local nonprofit, discovered that their grant funding had been reduced and had to scale back their promotional materials order significantly. Suddenly, my projected income for the month was cut in half. I sat in my home office, staring at spreadsheets that told an uncomfortable story about cash flow and upcoming expenses. For the first time since I'd started freelancing, I felt genuinely scared about my ability to make the business work. The timing felt cosmically unfair. Just as Patricia's 6-month prediction was gaining momentum, I was facing the exact kind of financial instability she had warned about. David found me there at 10 o'clock that night, hunched over my laptop, with papers spread across every available surface. "How bad is it?" he asked gently, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Bad enough that I'm starting to wonder if your mother was right," I admitted. "Maybe this was all a huge mistake. Maybe I should have stayed at the corporate job and kept my artistic dreams as a hobby." "Do you really believe that?" I looked around my small office, taking in the mood boards pinned to the walls, the portfolio of work I'd created over the past 8 months, the thank you notes from satisfied clients who had found their voices through my designs. Despite the current crisis, I had built something real here. It wasn't stable in the traditional sense, but it was mine. "No," I said finally. "I don't believe that, but I'm scared that not believing it is going to hurt both of us." David was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised me. "What if we proved her wrong in a way she couldn't argue with?" "What do you mean?" "What if we documented this? What if we kept track of every milestone, every success, every challenge overcome? What if we built a record of our marriage and your business that showed exactly how wrong her prediction was?" It was an interesting idea, though I wasn't sure how we would implement it practically. But the concept of actively building evidence against Patricia's prediction appealed to me. Instead of simply hoping she would be wrong, we could work to make sure she was wrong in a way that was impossible to deny. "Like a photo journal?" I asked. "Like whatever feels right to you. Photos, written records, business milestones, marriage milestones. Proof that we're not just surviving, but thriving." I felt something shift inside me, a movement from defensive fear to proactive determination. Patricia had made her prediction publicly, in front of everyone we cared about. Maybe it was time to start building our response just as publicly. "I like that idea," I said. "I like it a lot." "Good," David said, standing up and kissing the top of my head. "Because I have a feeling that 6 months from now, we're going to have a very different story to tell." As I turned off my computer and prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since our wedding day: excitement about proving Patricia wrong. She had given us a timeline and a challenge, whether she meant to or not. Now it was up to us to meet that challenge in a way that would be impossible for her to dismiss or minimize. 6 months. We had 6 months to build something undeniable. And despite the current financial uncertainty, I was starting to believe that we could do exactly that. The third month of our marriage brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. I was sitting in my home office on a rainy Thursday morning, sketching logo concepts for a small veterinary clinic, when my cell phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Maya Chen Design, I answered, trying to sound more professional than I felt while wearing pajama pants and fuzzy slippers. Hi, this is Rebecca Santos from Timber and Stone Development. I got your name from Jim Thompson over at Cascade Hops. We're looking for someone to handle the complete branding package for a new mixed-use development project here in Portland. And Jim spoke very highly of your work. I nearly dropped my pencil. Timber and Stone was one of Portland's most respected development companies, known for creating sustainable, community-focused projects that transformed neighborhoods while preserving their character. This was exactly the kind of client I'd dreamed of working with when I first started my business. I'd love to hear more about the project, I managed to say, hoping my voice didn't betray how excited I was. We're developing a former industrial site in the Alberta district into a mixed-use space that will include affordable housing, retail spaces for local businesses, and a community center. We want the branding to reflect both the history of the area and our vision for its future. Jim mentioned that you specialize in working with businesses that have strong community connections. We talked for another 20 minutes about the scope of the project, the timeline, and the budget. By the time I hung up, I was staring at notes that represented more money than I'd made in my first 6 months of freelancing combined. This wasn't just a good client. This was a career-defining opportunity. I called David immediately, interrupting his lunch break at school to share the news. Maya, that's incredible, he said, and I could hear the genuine excitement in his voice. When do you start? I have a meeting with their team next Monday to discuss the details, but if everything goes well, it could be a 6-month project that would completely establish my reputation in the Portland business community. Wait, David said, and I could hear him calculating in his head. 6 months from now would be exactly 6 months from our wedding day, I finished. The day your mother predicted our marriage would end. There was a moment of silence, as we both processed the cosmic timing of this opportunity. Then David started laughing, and I found myself joining in despite the nervous energy coursing through my system. You know what this means, right? David said when we'd both caught our breath. That I need to not mess this up? That you get to prove my mother spectacularly wrong while doing exactly what you love. The meeting the following Monday exceeded my highest expectations. Rebecca Santos turned out to be a woman in her 40s who had built Timber and Stone from the ground up, focusing on developments that strengthened communities rather than displacing them. She introduced me to her team, including an architect named Marcus Williams, who had specific ideas about how the visual branding should complement the physical design of the space. We don't want something generic, Rebecca explained as we walked through the development site, a collection of old warehouses and empty lots that would be transformed over the next 2 years. We want branding that tells the story of this neighborhood, where it's been and where it's going. Jim showed us the work you did for Cascade Hops, and we loved how you captured both the brewery's craft heritage and its modern approach. I spent 3 hours with the Timber and Stone team, taking notes and photographs, asking questions about their vision and their target community. By the time I left, I had enough information to develop a comprehensive proposal that would showcase everything I'd learned about branding and community engagement over the past year. The proposal took me 2 weeks to complete. I researched the history of the Alberta district, interviewed longtime residents about what the neighborhood meant to them, and developed a visual identity that honored both the area's industrial past and its evolving future. The final presentation included logo concepts, color palettes, typography choices, and mock-ups showing how the branding would appear on everything from building signage to promotional materials. When I submitted the proposal, I felt more confident about my work than I had since starting my business. This wasn't just good design. It was meaningful design that would make a real difference in people's lives. Rebecca called me 2 days later to offer me the contract. "Your proposal was exactly what we were looking for," she said. "You understood not just what we wanted to create, but why we wanted to create it. When can you start?" The timber and stone. Project transformed my business in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working with a high-profile client opened doors to other opportunities, and my portfolio began filling with projects that challenged me creatively while providing financial stability. More importantly, the work felt aligned with my values in a way that my corporate job never had. But success brought its own complications, particularly when it came to Patricia's ongoing campaign of skepticism about my career choices. David's weekly phone calls with his mother had become increasingly tense as my business grew. She seemed unable to accept that I was succeeding, instead finding new reasons to predict eventual failure. "She says you're probably overcharging clients, and that your success won't last once people realize they can get the same work done cheaper elsewhere," David reported after one particularly frustrating conversation. "She thinks you're neglecting your responsibilities as a wife by working too much. She wants to know if we're saving enough money for the future or if we're just spending everything as we make it." Each reported criticism felt like Patricia was moving the goalposts, unable to admit that her initial prediction might have been wrong. It became clear that no amount of professional success would satisfy her concerns, because her concerns weren't really about my career. They were about control and her inability to accept that David had chosen a life different from what she had envisioned for him. The situation came to a head during a family video call in our 4th month of marriage. Miguel was visiting Patricia in Phoenix, and they'd invited David to join a family conversation that was supposed to be about planning a summer reunion. I wasn't specifically invited to participate, but I could hear the conversation from the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "David looks tired," Patricia said, her voice carrying clearly through our laptop speakers. "Are you sure everything is okay with work?" "Everything's fine, Mom. I'm just busy with lesson planning and Maya's been working on some big projects." "That's what I'm worried about," Patricia continued. "You're carrying all the household responsibilities while Maya focuses on her little business. That's not sustainable, sweetheart." I set down the wooden spoon I'd been using to stir pasta sauce and moved closer to the living room, where David was sitting with his laptop open on the coffee table. "It's not like that, Mom," David said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Maya's business is doing really well. She's working with major clients now, making good money, building something substantial." "Oh, David," Patricia's voice took on that condescending tone I'd learned to recognize. "You're such a sweet, supportive husband, but you don't have to pretend with family. We all know that these creative ventures rarely work out long term." "It's not pretending," David said firmly. "Maya just landed a 6-month contract with one of Portland's biggest development companies. She's doing exactly what she set out to do." "And what happens when that contract ends?" Patricia shot back. "What happens when the next client decides they don't need her services? You can't build a stable life on projects that come and go." Miguel's voice came through the speakers, clearly trying to mediate. "Mom, maybe we should focus on planning the reunion instead of analyzing David's marriage." "I'm not analyzing his marriage," Patricia said defensively. "I'm concerned about his future. Someone has to be realistic about these things." That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I walked into the living room and sat down next to David on the couch, positioning myself so that I was visible in the laptop camera. "Hi, Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about our marriage and my career." Patricia's face appeared in the video call window, her expression shifting from surprise to barely concealed annoyance. "Maya, I didn't realize you were listening. It's hard not to hear when you're discussing my life and my marriage in the next room," I replied. "I wanted to address some of the things you've been saying." "I don't think this is the appropriate time or place," Patricia began, but I continued speaking. "Actually, I think this is exactly the right time and place. You made some very public predictions about our marriage at our wedding reception. You've continued to express doubts about my ability to contribute to our household. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's really happening." David looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern, clearly unsure whether this confrontation was a good idea, but willing to support me either way. "Maya's business is thriving," David said, jumping in to support me. "She's making more money now than she was at her corporate job, working with clients she's passionate about, building something that has real value. And our marriage is stronger than it's ever been," I added. "We support each other's goals. We communicate openly about challenges, and we're building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values." Patricia's expression had grown increasingly rigid during this exchange. "I'm sure you both believe that," she said carefully. "But belief doesn't always align with reality. I've seen too many couples struggle when one person makes impractical career choices." "What would it take for you to admit that you were wrong?" I asked directly. "What would I have to achieve professionally for you to acknowledge that leaving my corporate job was the right decision?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Patricia looked genuinely caught off guard, as if she'd never considered the possibility that she might actually be wrong about my prospects. "I suppose," she said slowly, "if you could maintain consistent income for a full year, if you could prove that this isn't just beginner's luck." "And our marriage?" I pressed. "What would it take for you to admit that your 6-month prediction was unfair and inaccurate?" Another pause. "I suppose if you make it to your first anniversary without any major problems." "Define major problems," David interjected, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard from him. "Financial stress? Arguments about money? Resentment about career sacrifices?" Patricia listed. "The kinds of issues that destroy marriages when people make impractical decisions." I felt something crystallize inside me, a sense of clarity about what I needed to do. "Okay," I said. "Let's make this official. You predicted our marriage wouldn't last 6 months. We're now 4 months in, and we're stronger than ever. You think my business success is temporary luck rather than sustainable achievement. I'm willing to prove you wrong on both counts." "Maya," David said quietly, "you don't have to prove anything to anyone." "Actually, I think I do," I replied, still looking directly at Patricia through the laptop screen. "Not because I need your approval, but because these predictions of yours have been hanging over our marriage like a cloud. It's time to clear the air." "And how exactly do you propose to do that?" Patricia asked, her tone skeptical but intrigued. "Documentation," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "Photos, financial records, client testimonials, evidence of our relationship growth. A complete record of the next few months leading up to our first anniversary. When we reach that milestone, happily married and professionally successful, I want you to publicly acknowledge that your predictions were wrong." "And if you don't make it to your first anniversary?" Patricia asked. "If your business fails or your marriage struggles?" "Then you can say you told us so," I replied. "But I'm confident that's not going to happen." Miguel's voice came through the speakers again, sounding both amused and concerned. "This is either going to be really satisfying or really awkward at family gatherings." "It's going to be satisfying," David said firmly, reaching over to take my hand. "Because Maya's right. We are stronger than ever, and her business is absolutely going to succeed." After the call ended, David and I sat in our living room processing what had just happened. I'd essentially challenged my mother-in-law to a public test of her predictions about our marriage and my career, with our first wedding anniversary as the ultimate deadline. "Do you think I went too far?" I asked, suddenly second-guessing the confrontational approach I'd taken. "I think you were brilliant," David replied. "You called her bluff. She's been making these predictions for months without any accountability. Now she has to actually stand behind them. But what if something does go wrong? What if I lose the Timber and stone contract? Or we have some kind of marriage crisis? Or... David stopped me by placing his hands on my shoulders and looking directly into my eyes. Maya, listen to me. We're going to be fine. Better than fine. We're going to thrive. And when we reach our first anniversary, we're going to have documented proof of everything we've built together. That night, I started what would become our anniversary project. I created a digital folder labeled Year 1 and began collecting evidence of our growth, both as individuals and as a couple. Screenshots of positive client feedback, photos of David and me working together on household projects, financial records showing my increasing income, images of the work I was creating for Timber and Stone. It felt strange at first, documenting our lives with such intentionality. But as the weeks passed, the project became less about proving Patricia wrong and more about recognizing and celebrating the life we were actually building together. Every milestone, every challenge overcome, every moment of joy or growth became part of a larger story we were telling about who we were becoming. The Timber and Stone project continued to exceed expectations. My designs were implemented across the development site, and I began receiving inquiries from other companies who had seen my work. Rebecca Santos recommended me to colleagues in Seattle and Sacramento, and my client base expanded beyond Portland for the first time. More importantly, the work felt meaningful in ways that went beyond personal success. The Alberta District Development was creating affordable housing and supporting local businesses, and my branding was helping to tell the story of positive community change. This was the kind of career impact I'd dreamed about, but never quite believed was possible. As our 6-month wedding anniversary approached, I realized that Patricia's prediction had become a strange gift. Her public doubt had forced David and me to be more intentional about our communication, more aware of our growth, more grateful for what we were building together. Instead of simply hoping our marriage would succeed, we were actively working to make it thrive. The documentation project had revealed patterns I might not have noticed otherwise. David and I had developed rituals for supporting each other through stress, ways of celebrating small victories, methods for handling disagreements that brought us closer together rather than driving us apart. We weren't just surviving the challenges of early marriage and career transition. We were excelling at them. 6 months after Patricia's devastating wedding toast, I sat in my home office surrounded by evidence of everything we'd accomplished. Client contracts, love letters David had written me during particularly stressful weeks, photos of us celebrating business milestones and personal moments, financial records showing steady income growth, testimonials from satisfied clients who had become friends. But the most important document in the folder wasn't about business success or financial stability. It was a letter I'd written to myself on our wedding night after the reception disaster, when I was feeling hurt and uncertain about what Patricia's prediction might mean for our future. Dear future Maya, the letter began, tonight was supposed to be perfect, and in many ways it was. But it was also the night your mother-in-law publicly predicted the failure of your marriage. I'm writing this because I want you to remember how I'm feeling right now. Not just the hurt and embarrassment, but the determination. I believe in David, I believe in us, and I believe in the life we're building together. I hope that when you read this, you'll be able to confirm that this belief was justified. Reading those words 6 months later, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the woman I'd been on my wedding night. She had refused to let Patricia's cruelty define her future, and she had made choices that led to exactly the kind of life she'd hoped to build. It was time to show Patricia exactly how wrong she'd been, and I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in our 10th month of marriage, while I was reviewing the final design proofs for the Timber and Stone project's grand opening materials. The voice on the other end belonged to Sarah Mitchell, the editor of Portland Business Journal, and what she had to say made me set down my coffee cup so quickly that it splashed across my desk. Maya, we'd like to feature you and your company in our upcoming Entrepreneurs Under 30 Spotlight. Your work with timber, And Stone has been getting a lot of attention in the development community, and we think our readers would be interested in your story. I stared at the coffee stains spreading across my project notes, trying to process what this meant. Portland Business Journal was the kind of publication that could transform a small business overnight. Being featured in their entrepreneur spotlight wasn't just recognition, it was validation from the very business community that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. The article would include a photo shoot at your workspace and an interview about your transition from corporate work to entrepreneurship, Sarah continued. We're particularly interested in how you've built relationships with clients who share your values around community development and sustainable business practices. After I hung up, I sat in my home office for several minutes, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built over the past year. The space had evolved from a hastily converted spare bedroom into a professional workspace that reflected both my aesthetic sensibilities and my business success. Original artwork from local artists hung on the walls, client project samples were displayed in custom frames, and my desk setup included equipment that rivaled what I'd had access to at my corporate job. But more than the physical transformation, I could feel how much I had changed as a person. The woman who had quit her marketing job 11 months ago had been driven by dissatisfaction and hope. The woman I'd become was driven by purpose and confidence. I knew who I was as a designer, as a business owner, and as a partner in a marriage that had not only survived Patricia's prediction, but had thrived in ways I couldn't have imagined. The Portland Business Journal interview took place the following week, and photographer Jenna had volunteered to assist with additional behind-the-scenes documentation for our anniversary project. As I answered questions about my career transition, my design philosophy, and my vision for the future, I found myself thinking about the conversation David and I had shared exactly 1 year ago, when I first told him I wanted to leave my corporate job. "What surprised you most about starting your own business?" Sarah asked, her recording device capturing every word. "How much it taught me about myself," I replied honestly. "When you're working for someone else, you can hide behind company policies and established procedures. When it's your own business, every decision reflects your values and your vision. You learn very quickly what you're willing to compromise on and what you absolutely won't. And what about the financial aspects? A lot of people hesitate to leave stable employment because of income uncertainty." I thought about Patricia's repeated concerns about financial stability, her predictions about my inability to contribute meaningfully to our household income. "The financial transition was challenging at first," I said, "but it taught me the difference between security and the illusion of security. My corporate job felt safe because I received the same paycheck every 2 weeks, but I had no control over layoffs, reorganizations, or changes in company direction. With my own business, I'm responsible for creating my own stability, and that's actually more secure in the long run." The article was scheduled to publish in 3 weeks, exactly 2 weeks before our first wedding anniversary. The timing felt cosmically appropriate, as if the universe was orchestrating the perfect response to Patricia's public prediction. But the real turning point came unexpectedly, during a phone call from Miguel that arrived on a Saturday evening while David and I were cooking dinner together. "David, you need to know that Mom has been talking to people about Maya's business," Miguel said without preamble when David answered the phone. "She's been calling relatives, telling them that Maya's success is probably temporary and that you, too, are likely headed for problems." David put the call on speaker so I could hear, and I felt my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Even as my business flourished and our marriage strengthened, Patricia continued to undermine us within the Thai family network. "What exactly has she been saying?" I asked. "She's convinced that Maya is hiding financial problems from you, David. She thinks the big development project is probably the last good contract Maya will get, and she's been telling people to expect an announcement about Maya going back to corporate work soon." "That's completely ridiculous," David said, his voice tight with anger. "Maya's business is doing better than ever. She has clients lined up for the next 6 months, and she just got featured in Portland Business Journal. I know that, Miguel replied. But Mom has worked herself into believing that Maya's success is somehow fake or unsustainable. She's also been suggesting that your marriage is under strain because of financial stress and career conflicts. I felt something snap inside me, a final breaking point after months of patient endurance. Patricia wasn't just doubting my business anymore. She was actively spreading rumors designed to damage my reputation and my marriage within David's family network. "Miguel," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "I want you to give your mother a message from me." "Maya, you don't have to," David started, but I held up my hand. "Tell her that I'm inviting her to Portland for our first wedding anniversary celebration. Tell her that I want her to see exactly what we've built over the past year, personally and professionally. And tell her that if she's going to keep making predictions about our failure, she should be willing to face the evidence of our success." "Are you sure about this?" Miguel asked. "Mom in your house for a weekend could be intense." "I'm absolutely sure," I replied. "It's time to settle this once and for all." After Miguel hung up, David and I stood in our kitchen processing what I'd just proposed. Inviting Patricia to Portland for our anniversary was either going to provide the closure we needed or create an explosive family confrontation that could damage relationships permanently. "You know she's going to come," David said quietly. "She won't be able to resist the opportunity to prove that she was right all along." "Good," I replied, "because I want her to see everything. I want her to meet my clients, tour my workspace, see our financial records, witness how we interact as a married couple. I want her to have to confront the reality of what we've actually built instead of the fantasy of failure she's been nurturing. And if she still refuses to admit she was wrong, then at least we'll know we gave her every possible opportunity to see the truth." The Portland Business Journal article published 2 weeks later with a headline that made me laugh out loud. "From corporate cubicle to creative community, how Maya Chen built a business around her values." The piece included photos of me working in my home office, quotes from satisfied clients including Rebecca Santos from Timber and Stone, and a sidebar about the growing trend of professionals leaving traditional employment to start values-driven businesses. The article generated immediate response. My business phone started ringing with inquiries from potential clients who had read about my work. Other entrepreneurs reached out to ask about my transition strategy. Most surprisingly, I received a message from my former corporate supervisor, congratulating me on my success and asking if I'd be interested in consulting on a project basis for my old company. But the response that mattered most came from Patricia, in the form of a terse text message to David. "I'll be there for your anniversary weekend. We need to talk." The weeks leading up to Patricia's visit were filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and preparation. I organized all the documentation from our anniversary project into a comprehensive presentation that told the story of our first year of marriage through photos, letters, financial records, and client testimonials. David and I practiced having difficult conversations, role-playing potential scenarios for how the weekend might unfold. What if she looks at everything we show her and still insists that we're heading for failure? David asked during one of these practice sessions. Then we'll know that her predictions were never really about us, I replied. They were about her own fears and her need to control your life choices. And you'll be okay with that? I considered the question seriously. I'll be disappointed, but I'll be okay. Because we'll have done everything possible to build a bridge. And if she chooses not to cross it, that's her decision to make. Patricia arrived on Friday afternoon, 2 days before our actual anniversary date. David picked her up from the airport while I put finishing touches on the guest room and prepared for what felt like the most important weekend of our marriage. She looked exactly the same as she had at our wedding reception. Perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, carrying herself with the rigid posture of someone prepared for battle. But something in her expression seemed different, more uncertain than I'd seen her before. "Maya," she said when David brought her into our living room, "thank you for having me." "Thank you for coming," I replied, meaning it despite the nervous energy coursing through my system. "I know this weekend might be challenging for all of us, but I'm glad we're finally going to have this conversation." We started with a tour of the house, and I watched Patricia take in the changes we'd made over the past year. New furniture that reflected our combined taste, artwork from local artists whose work I'd discovered through client projects, a kitchen that showed evidence of two people who enjoyed cooking together. The spare bedroom that had become my office received particular attention. "This is where you work?" Patricia asked, examining the professional setup with something that might have been surprise. "This is where I built my business," I replied. "Every client relationship, every design project, every contract negotiation happened in this room." I showed her examples of my work, from the early Cascade hops materials that had launched my relationship with Mr. Thompson to the comprehensive timber and stone branding package that was now visible throughout one of Portland's most talked-about development projects. "Rebecca Santos called me one of the most talented designers she's worked with in 15 years of development projects," I said, handing Patricia a letter of recommendation that had arrived the previous week. "She's already contracted me for 2 additional projects next year." Patricia read the letter carefully, and I watched her expression shift as she processed the genuine praise from a respected business leader. "I have to admit," Patricia said slowly, "this is more substantial than I expected." "There's more," I said, and spent the next hour walking her through the complete documentation of our first year of marriage. Financial records showing my income, progression from uncertain startup to thriving business. Photos of David and me supporting each other through various challenges and celebrations. Letters we'd written to each other during stressful periods. Testimonials from friends and family about the strength of our relationship. The centerpiece of the presentation was a timeline that showed our growth, month by month, from Patricia's wedding reception prediction through the current moment. Every milestone was documented. Every challenge overcome was recorded. Every moment of joy and success was preserved. "You've been keeping track of all this?" Patricia asked, her voice softer than I'd heard it in the entire time I'd known her. "We wanted to be able to show you exactly what happened during the year you predicted. We wouldn't survive," David said. "We wanted you to see the reality instead of the assumption." Patricia was quiet for a long time, studying the materials we'd laid out across our dining room table. Finally, she looked up at both of us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I owe you both an apology," she said quietly. "A significant apology." The words hung in the air like something fragile and precious. I felt David reach for my hand under the table, both of us hardly daring to believe what we were hearing. "I was wrong about your business, Maya. I was wrong about your marriage. I was wrong about almost everything I said at your wedding reception." Patricia's voice was steady, but carried the weight of genuine regret. "I let my own fears about David's future cloud my judgment about what you were actually building together." "What changed your mind?" I asked gently. "Seeing the evidence," Patricia replied. "Not just the financial success, though that's obviously impressive, but seeing how you two have supported each other, how you've grown together, how you've built something that's bigger than either of you individually." She paused, looking around our home with new eyes. "I spent so many years worried about stability and security that I forgot that real security comes from building something meaningful with someone you trust completely." "We're not perfect," David said. "We've had challenges and disagreements, and moments of uncertainty. But we've handled them together," I added. "We've used them to become stronger instead of letting them drive us apart." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's what I should have seen from the beginning. Instead of looking for reasons why your choices might fail, I should have been celebrating the courage it took to make them." The rest of the weekend transformed into something none of us had expected. a genuine opportunity for rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. Patricia asked thoughtful questions about my business strategy, offered to connect me with potential clients in Phoenix, and even admitted that she was considering making some significant changes in her own life. Watching you leave your corporate job to follow your passion has made me think about some dreams I gave up years ago, she said during our last dinner together. I've always wanted to travel, to see more of the world before I'm too old to enjoy it. Maybe it's time to stop talking about it and actually do it. On Sunday evening, as David and I drove Patricia back to the airport, she turned to me from the back seat of our car. Maya, I want to do something to make up for the way I behaved at your wedding reception. That was unforgivable, and I've regretted it every day since it happened. Patricia, you don't need to— Yes, I do, she interrupted firmly. I want to throw you a proper first anniversary party. Something that celebrates what you've actually accomplished instead of predicting what might go wrong. I want to invite the family, tell them the real story of your first year of marriage, and give you the kind of support I should have offered from the beginning. I looked at David in the rearview mirror, and he was smiling with something that looked like amazed relief. I would love that, I said honestly, but only if you're doing it because you want to, not because you feel obligated. I want to, Patricia said firmly. I want to celebrate my daughter-in-law's success and my son's happiness. I want to show everyone how wrong I was and how proud I am of what you've built together. The anniversary party Patricia organized was everything our wedding reception should have been. She invited extended family from Phoenix and Los Angeles, including relatives I'd never met who welcomed me with genuine warmth. She prepared a speech that publicly acknowledged her mistaken predictions and celebrated our actual achievements. She displayed examples of my design work and talked knowledgeably about my business success with the same pride she might have shown for her own accomplishments. Most importantly, she toasted our marriage with words that erased the memory of her devastating wedding reception prediction. To David and Maya, who have shown me that the strongest relationships are built on mutual support, shared values, and the courage to pursue your dreams together. I was wrong to doubt what you were building, and I couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished. As I looked around the room filled with family members who were now celebrating rather than doubting our choices, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond simple vindication. Patricia's original prediction had forced David and me to be more intentional about our marriage, more deliberate about our choices, more grateful for what we were building together. In a strange way, her doubt had made our success more meaningful because we'd had to fight for it. But the most satisfying moment came later that evening, when Jenna pulled me aside to show me something on her phone. I've been working on this. As a surprise, she said, opening a video file. Remember how I filmed Patricia's original speech at your wedding reception? I turned it into something special. The video began with footage from our wedding reception, Patricia's prediction, playing over images of shocked guests and our devastated faces. But then it transitioned into a montage of everything that had happened since. Photos from our anniversary documentation project, clips from local news coverage of the Timber and Stone development, screenshots of the Portland Business Journal, article, and finally, footage from Patricia's apology and anniversary party speech. The final image was of David and me dancing at our anniversary celebration, surrounded by family and friends who were genuinely celebrating our success, with Patricia's new words playing as narration. The strongest relationships are built on mutual support, shared values, and the courage to pursue your dreams together. What are you going to do with this? I asked Jenna. Whatever you want, she replied. Keep it private, share it with family, or maybe post it online for people who might need to see that sometimes the best response to doubt is simply to prove it wrong. I watched the video one more time, taking in the complete story it told about our journey from Patricia's public prediction to our current reality. It wasn't just about business success or marriage survival. It was about the power of choosing to build something meaningful despite other people's fears and limitations. I know exactly what I want to do with this, I said finally. 3 months later, I posted the video on social media with a simple caption. 1 year ago, my mother-in-law predicted our marriage wouldn't last 6 months. Here's what actually happened. The video went viral within hours, shared by thousands of people who connected with the story of overcoming doubt and building something authentic despite external pressure. The responses were overwhelming. Messages from other entrepreneurs who had faced similar family skepticism. Notes from couples who had struggled with disapproving relatives. Comments from people who were inspired to pursue their own dreams despite fears and predictions of failure. But the response that mattered most came from Patricia herself, in the form of a handwritten letter that arrived a week after the video went viral. Dear Maya and David, I've seen the video, and I'm amazed by how beautifully it tells the story of your first year together. I'm not embarrassed by seeing my original speech. I'm grateful that you documented the journey that led to my understanding of what you were really building. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become the kind of mother-in-law you deserved from the beginning. I love you both. Mom. Today, 3 years after Patricia's wedding reception prediction, David and I are preparing to celebrate our 4th wedding anniversary. My business has expanded to include 2 additional designers, and we're opening a small office space in Portland's Pearl District. David was recently promoted to department head at his school, and he's started a summer program that brings local history to life for middle school students. Patricia visits us regularly now, and she's become one of my business's most enthusiastic supporters. She's even started her own small travel blog, documenting the adventures she's been taking around the country. Last month, she asked me to help her design a logo for it. I want something that captures the idea of it's never too late to start over, she explained. Something that shows you can admit when you're wrong and choose to do better. As I worked on her design, I reflected on how much all of our lives had changed since that devastating moment at our wedding reception. Patricia's prediction hadn't destroyed our marriage. It had challenged us to build something stronger than we might have otherwise created. Her doubt hadn't undermined my business. It had motivated me to succeed in ways that were impossible, to dismiss or minimize. Sometimes the people who predict your failure give you the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to prove them spectacularly wrong while discovering just how much you're actually capable of achieving. The marriage Patricia said wouldn't last 6 months is now approaching its 4th anniversary, stronger and more fulfilling than either David or I imagined possible. The business career she dismissed as unrealistic has become a thriving company that creates meaningful work and supports our community. But perhaps most importantly, the relationship that began with public humiliation and private doubt has evolved into genuine family connection built on mutual respect and shared celebration of each other's growth. 6 months turned into 4 years and counting. And we're just getting started. The phone rang at 7 in the morning on what would become the most surreal day of my professional life. I was barely awake, stumbling toward the coffee maker in my pajamas, when the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize from New York City. Maya Chen Design, I answered, trying to sound more alert than I felt. Ms. Chen, this is Jennifer Walsh from Good Morning America. We saw the video about your mother-in-law's wedding prediction that's been circulating online, and we'd love to have you and your husband on the show to discuss your story. I nearly dropped the phone. The video Jenna had created, which I'd posted 6 months ago as a simple response to Patricia's original prediction, had apparently reached the producers of one of the country's most watched morning shows. You want us on Good Morning America? I repeated, mostly to make sure I wasn't still dreaming. We're fascinated by your story of turning family doubt into motivation for success, Jennifer explained. Your video has resonated with millions of people who faced similar challenges with disapproving family members. We think our audience would love to hear more about how you navigated that situation and built such a successful business despite the skepticism. The interview was scheduled for the following week, which gave David and me exactly 7 days to prepare for what felt like the most public validation of our journey imaginable. The girl who had sat in her home office 18 months earlier, wondering if Patricia might be right about her chances of success, was about to share her story on national television. "Can you believe this is happening?" David asked as we sat. In our living room that evening, both of us still processing the surreal turn our lives had taken. "Honestly, no," I replied. 2 years ago, I was afraid to quit my corporate job because I worried about what people would think. Now I'm about to talk about that decision on national television. "Are you nervous?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm nervous about the logistics of live television, but I'm not nervous about telling our story. Everything we've built over the past 2 years is real. The business success, the marriage growth, the family relationships we've repaired. I'm proud of all of it." The week leading up to the Good Morning America appearance was a whirlwind of preparation and unexpected developments. The video had continued to gain traction online, shared by business publications, marriage blogs, and social media accounts focused on entrepreneurship and family dynamics. My business phone was ringing constantly with inquiries from potential clients who had seen the story and wanted to work with someone who had demonstrated such resilience and determination. More significantly, I started receiving messages from people whose lives had been touched by our story in ways I hadn't anticipated. A woman in Texas wrote to tell me that watching our video had given her the courage to leave her unfulfilling corporate job to start a bakery she'd been dreaming about for years. A couple in Florida said that seeing how David and I had handled family pressure had helped them stand up to relatives who disapproved of their decision to adopt children rather than have biological ones. The messages kept coming, each one revealing how our personal journey had somehow become a source of inspiration for people facing their own moments of doubt and external pressure. What had started as a simple documentation of our first year of marriage had evolved into something much larger, a testament to the power of believing in yourself when others don't. Patricia called the night before our television appearance, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and amazement. "Maya, I never imagined that my terrible behavior at your wedding would lead to something like this," she said. "Are you sure you want me to be part of the story? I'm not exactly proud of how I acted." "Patricia, your willingness to admit you were wrong and to change your perspective is just as important as our success," I replied. "People need to see that relationships can be repaired, that people can grow and learn from their mistakes. I just hope I don't embarrass you on national television." "You won't," I assured her. "You're going to show people that it's never too late to choose love and support over fear and control." The Good Morning America studio in New York was both smaller and more impressive than I had expected. The bright lights, multiple cameras, and bustling crew created an atmosphere of controlled chaos that somehow felt energizing rather than overwhelming. David and I sat together on the familiar curved couch, holding hands as we waited for the interview to begin. The host, Michael Strawn, greeted us warmly during the commercial break. "I have to tell you, your story has been shared in our newsroom more than any other feature we've done this month. People really connect with what you've been through." When the cameras started rolling, the interview felt surprisingly natural. Michael asked thoughtful questions about the wedding reception incident, my decision to start my own business, and how we had handled the family pressure throughout our first year of marriage. "Maya, when your mother-in-law made that prediction at your wedding reception, what was going through your mind?" Michael asked. "Honestly, I was devastated," I replied. "It was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and suddenly I was questioning everything about our future. But looking back, I think that moment forced David and me to be more intentional about our marriage and our goals than we might have been otherwise." "David, how did you handle being caught between your wife and your mother?" "It was incredibly difficult," David admitted. "I love my mother, but I also knew that Maya was making smart, calculated decisions about her career and our future. I had to choose between keeping the peace and supporting the woman I married. Ultimately, supporting Maya was the only choice that made sense." The interview segment that generated the most response came when Michael asked about Patricia's transformation. "We understand that your mother-in-law, Patricia, has had a change of heart about her prediction. Can you tell us about that?" "Patricia is actually here with us today," I said, gesturing toward the green room where she was waiting. "She insisted on coming because she wanted to publicly acknowledge how wrong she was and how proud she is of what we've built together." Patricia joined us on the couch for the final segment of the interview, and her presence transformed the entire tone of the conversation. She spoke eloquently about her initial fears, her mistaken assumptions, and her journey toward understanding and supporting our choices. "Patricia, what would you say to other family members who might be expressing similar doubts about their loved one's unconventional choices?" Michael asked. "I would say that your job as a family member is to love and support, not to control and predict," Patricia replied. "Maya and David taught me that sometimes the choices that look risky from the outside are actually the most secure, because they're based on genuine passion and careful planning. I almost missed out on celebrating their success because I was too focused on imagining their failure." The interview concluded with Michael asking about our future plans, and I found myself describing dreams I hadn't even fully articulated to myself yet. "We're planning to expand the business into a full-service creative agency," I said. "We want to work with more companies that are committed to community development and sustainable business practices. And personally, David and I are talking about starting a family. We want to build something that our children can be proud of." After the cameras stopped rolling, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The show's social media accounts were flooded with comments from viewers who had been inspired by our story. My business website crashed from the traffic of people trying to learn more about my work. Most importantly, I received hundreds of messages from people who said that seeing our journey had given them permission to pursue their own dreams despite family doubts or external pressure. The week following the Good Morning America appearance brought opportunities I could never have imagined. A literary agent contacted me about writing a book about entrepreneurship and family dynamics. A major conference invited me to give a keynote speech about turning criticism into motivation. Several large companies reached out about potential consulting contracts that would allow me to work with organizations across the country. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Amanda, my former colleague from the corporate marketing job I'd left 3 years earlier, called to tell me that she was finally ready to leave her position and start the freelance consulting business she'd been dreaming about. "Watching your journey gave me the courage to believe that I could do this too," she said. "I've been making excuses for years about why the timing wasn't right, but seeing how you handled all the doubt and uncertainty showed me that the timing is never perfect. You just have to be willing to take the leap." This conversation led to an idea that would become the next phase of my professional evolution. Amanda and I decided to partner on a new venture, a consulting and coaching business specifically designed to help other professionals make the transition from corporate employment to entrepreneurship. We would offer practical guidance, emotional support, and a community of people who understood the challenges of building something new while facing skepticism from family and friends. The business, which we named Leap Partners, launched 6 months after the Good Morning America appearance with a waiting list of clients who had found us through our story. We offered workshops on business planning, financial management, and family communication strategies. We created online courses for people who couldn't attend in-person sessions. Most importantly, we built a community where people could share their fears, celebrate their victories, and support each other through the inevitable challenges of entrepreneurship. Patricia became one of our most enthusiastic supporters, often sharing our workshops with friends who were considering major life changes. She had started her own travel blog, which had grown into a successful platform for seniors interested in adventure travel, and she frequently spoke about how her experience with our journey had taught her that it's never too late to pursue new dreams. "I spent so many years focused on security and predictability that I forgot how exciting it could be to try something new," she told a group of women at one of our workshops. "Maya and David taught me that taking calculated risks isn't irresponsible, It's how you create a life that's truly fulfilling. The transformation in our family dynamics was perhaps the most surprising outcome of our entire journey. Patricia had evolved from our biggest critic to our most vocal supporter. But more than that, she had become a genuine friend and collaborator. She often stayed with us when she was in Portland, and our conversations had moved far beyond the surface-level politeness of our early relationship. "I want to apologize again for how I handled your wedding reception," she said during one of these visits, as we sat on our back porch, watching David work in the garden we'd planted together. "Patricia, you've apologized enough," I replied. "What matters is what happened after that. You were willing to look at the evidence, admit you were wrong, and change your perspective. That takes real courage." I was so afraid of David making a mistake that I couldn't see he was making exactly the right choice, she said. "You two have built something beautiful together. Not just the business success, but the way you support each other and grow together. I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to be part of that instead of remaining on the outside looking." And 3 years after Patricia's devastating wedding prediction, David and I celebrated our 4th anniversary with a party that looked nothing like the disaster our reception had become. This time, we were surrounded by family and friends who genuinely celebrated our choices and achievements. Patricia gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about the lessons she had learned about love, support, and the courage to admit when you're wrong. But the most significant moment of the evening came when David and I shared our own announcement with our guests. After months of discussion and planning, we were ready to take the next step in building our life together. 4 years ago, Patricia predicted that our marriage wouldn't last 6 months, I said, raising my glass to our gathered friends and family. She was wrong about that, just as she was wrong about my business prospects and our ability to build something meaningful together. Tonight, we want to share some news that proves just how committed we are to our future together. David took my hand and smiled at our guests. Maya and I are expecting our first child. The cheer that went up from our guests was deafening, but I was watching Patricia's face as she processed the news. Her expression moved through surprise, joy, and something that looked like wonder as she realized that the marriage she had once predicted would fail was now bringing new life into the world. Later that evening, as our guests were leaving, Patricia approached us with tears in her eyes. "I can't believe I almost missed all of this," she said, pulling both of us into a hug. "I can't believe I almost chose fear over faith, control over love. Thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for not giving up on us," David replied. As I write this, our daughter Emma is 6 months old, and I'm working from a home office that now includes a crib in the corner and toys scattered across the floor. Leap Partners has grown into a thriving business that helps hundreds of people each year make successful transitions to entrepreneurship. Patricia visits regularly, absolutely devoted to her granddaughter and full of stories about her own adventures and achievements. The video that started this incredible journey has been viewed over 10 million times, and I still receive messages from people who say it inspired them to pursue their dreams despite family doubts or external pressure. What began as a simple response to one woman's prediction has become a source of hope and motivation for people around the world. But perhaps the most important lesson from our story isn't about business success or proving people wrong. It's about the power of choosing to build something positive in response to negativity, of using doubt as motivation rather than allowing it to become limitation. Patricia's prediction that our marriage wouldn't last 6 months was spectacularly wrong. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for that prediction because it forced us to be more intentional about our choices, more deliberate about our growth, and more committed to supporting each other through challenges. The marriage that wasn't supposed to survive 6 months is now entering its 5th year, stronger and more fulfilling than either of us imagined possible. The business career that was dismissed as unrealistic has become a thriving company that creates meaningful work and supports our growing family. The relationship that began with public humiliation has evolved into genuine family connection, built on mutual respect and shared celebration of each other's achievements. Sometimes the people who predict your failure give you the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to prove them wrong while discovering just how much you're actually capable of achieving. Patricia's doubt didn't destroy our marriage or undermine my business. It motivated us to build something so strong and successful that it became impossible to dismiss or minimize. Today, when people ask me about handling family pressure or overcoming doubt, I tell them about the power of documentation, the importance of surrounding yourself with supportive people, and the value of staying focused on your goals even when others can't see your vision. But most importantly, I tell them that sometimes the best response to a prediction of failure is simply to succeed so completely that the prediction becomes irrelevant. 6 months became 4 years and counting, and now we're building something even more beautiful. A family legacy based on love, support, and the courage to pursue your dreams even when others don't understand them. The woman who shattered that champagne glass at her wedding reception, devastated by her mother-in-law's public prediction of failure, would be amazed to see what we've built together. She would be proud of the choices we made, the challenges we overcame, and the life we created despite the doubts and predictions of others. Patricia was wrong about everything, and we've never been happier to prove someone so completely, thoroughly, and spectacularly wrong. The letter arrived 5 years to the day after Patricia's wedding reception prediction, delivered by a courier who insisted I sign for it personally. The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, with my name written in Patricia's careful handwriting across the front. Inside, I found something that took my breath away. It was a check made out to Maya Chen Design for $50,000, along with a handwritten note that read, "Maya, this represents every penny I spent on pessimism that should have been invested in faith. Please use it to fund a scholarship program for young entrepreneurs who face family doubt. With all my love and admiration, Patricia." I sat in my expanded home office, now a dedicated space in the house we'd bought 2 years earlier, holding this unexpected gift and thinking about the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. Emma, now almost 2 years old, was napping in her room down the hall, and I could hear David in the kitchen preparing lunch for all of us. The scholarship program Patricia had suggested became reality 6 months later. The Martinez Chen Entrepreneurship Scholarship provided funding and mentorship for young people starting businesses despite family skepticism. Our first recipient was Maria Gonzalez, a 24-year-old woman whose parents had refused to support her organic farming venture. With our scholarship and guidance, she launched a successful community-supported agriculture program that now supplies fresh produce to 3 Portland neighborhoods. The second recipient was James Kim, whose family had pressured him to pursue a traditional medical career while he dreamed of developing assistive technology for people with disabilities. His innovations now help hundreds of individuals navigate daily life with greater independence, and his company has attracted interest from major tech firms across the country. Each scholarship recipient received not just financial support, but access to the network we'd built through Leap Partners, ongoing mentorship from successful entrepreneurs, and most importantly, a community of people who understood what it felt like to pursue dreams that others couldn't see or support. Patricia had become the scholarship program's most active volunteer, conducting interview sessions with applicants via video calls from whatever corner of the world her travels had taken her. Her questions were always insightful, focused on understanding not just the business concept, but the personal resilience of each candidate. "I want to fund the people who remind me of Maya," she explained during one of our planning meetings. "The ones who have a clear vision, a solid plan, and the determination to succeed despite the doubt of people who love them but can't see their potential." The scholarship program attracted attention from other successful entrepreneurs who had faced similar family challenges, and within 2 years we had enough funding to support 12 recipients annually. Each graduation ceremony became a celebration, not just of business success, but of personal courage and family healing. The most powerful moment came during our third annual award ceremony when Maria Gonzalez introduced her parents, who had flown in from California to celebrate her achievements. 3 years ago, my parents thought I was throwing my life away by choosing farming over the office job they wanted me to take, Maria said, addressing the audience of scholarship recipients, donors, and family members. Today, they're my business partners, helping me expand into 3 new markets. Sometimes the people who doubt you just need time to understand your vision. David and I had expanded our family as well. Emma now had a little brother, Samuel, who was 6 months old and already showing signs of the same determined personality that had helped us navigate the challenges of our early marriage. Patricia doted on both grandchildren with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time, sending postcards from her travels and planning visits around their milestones. Our marriage had evolved into something richer and more complex than either of us had imagined possible during those uncertain early months. We'd learned to handle stress as a team, to make major decisions through careful discussion and mutual support, and to celebrate each other's individual achievements while building shared goals. The business success had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Maya Chen Design had grown into a full-service creative agency with 8 employees and clients across the Pacific Northwest. Leap Partners served hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs each year through workshops, coaching programs, and online courses. The scholarship program had become a model replicated by other organizations in different cities. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the book that emerged from our story. 6 Months to Forever, Turning Family Doubt into Personal Success, became a bestseller within weeks of publication, resonating with readers who recognized their own experiences in our journey. The book tour took David, Patricia, and me to cities across the country, where we spoke to audiences about family dynamics, entrepreneurship, and the power of choosing growth over resentment. The most memorable event was a panel discussion in Phoenix, Patricia's hometown, where she spoke to a packed auditorium about the courage required to admit when you're wrong and the joy that comes from supporting rather than controlling the people you love. I spent the first 3 years of Maya and David's marriage waiting for them to fail, she told the audience. I wasted 3 years of their success being disappointed that I was wrong instead of being grateful that they were right. Don't make my mistake. When the people you love choose courage over comfort, choose faith over fear, you might be amazed by what they accomplish. The audience response was overwhelming, with many people approaching us afterward to share their own stories of family doubt and eventual understanding. A mother tearfully apologized to her daughter, who had started a nonprofit despite family pressure to pursue a more traditional career. A father admitted that his son's decision to become an artist had led to success he never could have imagined. These conversations reminded me that our story had become bigger than our personal experience. It had become a framework for understanding how families can grow through conflict, how doubt can become motivation, and how relationships can be strengthened rather than damaged by differences in vision and values. 10 years after Patricia's wedding reception prediction, we celebrated Emma's 7th birthday with a party that included 3 generations of family and friends who had supported our journey. Patricia, now 71 and still traveling regularly, gave a toast that captured the profound transformation our family had experienced. 10 years ago, I made a prediction about Maya and David's marriage that was so wrong it became famous, she said, raising her glass to the assembled guests. I predicted failure where I should have celebrated courage. I chose fear where I should have chosen faith. Today, as I look around this room filled with the family they've built, the business they've created, the community they've strengthened, and the lives they've touched, I want to make a new prediction. She paused, looking directly at David, and me with eyes full of love and pride. I predict that Maya and David's best years are still ahead of them. I predict that their marriage will continue to inspire others. I predict that their children will grow up knowing they can pursue any dream, because they've seen their parents turn doubt into determination and criticism into motivation. And I predict that our family will continue to grow stronger because we learned that love means supporting each other's dreams, not controlling them. The applause was deafening, but I was focused on the faces around us. Emma and Samuel, now old enough to understand that their family had overcome something significant. David's colleagues and my business partners who had watched us build something meaningful together. Scholarship recipients who had found the courage to pursue their own dreams. And Patricia herself, transformed from critic to champion, from skeptic to supporter. Later that evening, as we cleaned up after the party, David found me sitting on our back deck, looking out at the garden we'd planted together and thinking about the extraordinary path that had brought us to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I'm thinking about that woman who sat on a different porch 11 years ago, after your mother told her that her backyard wedding wasn't worth attending," I said. "I'm thinking about how terrified she was that maybe your mother was right about everything." And now? Now I realize that Patricia's doubt was never really about us. It was about her own fears, her own limitations, her own inability to imagine possibilities she hadn't experienced herself. Our job wasn't to convince her she was wrong. Our job was to build something so strong and beautiful that her doubts became irrelevant. David reached over and took my hand, the same gesture of support he'd offered countless times over the past decade. "Are you glad it happened the way it did?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about all the ways our story might have unfolded differently if Patricia had been supportive from the beginning, if we hadn't faced the pressure of her prediction, if we hadn't been forced to be so intentional about documenting and celebrating our growth. "I'm glad we survived it," I said finally. "I'm glad we turned it into something positive. I'm glad Patricia found the courage to change and grow, but mostly, I'm glad we learned that the most important approval we needed was our own." As I write this final chapter of our story, Samuel is starting kindergarten, and Emma is showing signs of the same entrepreneurial spirit that led me to leave my corporate job all those years ago. She started a small business selling friendship bracelets to her classmates, carefully tracking her profits in a notebook and making plans to expand into custom jewelry for grown-ups. David has been promoted to principal of his school, where he's implemented programs that encourage students to pursue their passions regardless of traditional expectations. Patricia continues to travel and write, now working on her own book about the adventures that began when she finally chose courage over comfort at age 67. The scholarship program has supported over 100 young entrepreneurs, many of whom have gone on to build successful businesses that create jobs and strengthen their communities. LEAP Partners has expanded to include online programs that serve people around the world who are navigating the transition from traditional employment to entrepreneurship. Most importantly, our marriage has become a source of strength, not just for us, but for others who see what's possible when two people choose to support each other's dreams completely and unconditionally. The prediction that our marriage wouldn't last 6 months has become a family legend, a story we tell with laughter rather than pain. A reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as obstacles. Patricia was wrong about everything that mattered, but her willingness to admit her mistakes, to learn and grow and change, transformed what could have been a permanent family rift into a deeper connection than any of us had imagined possible. 6 months became 11 years and counting. The business that was supposed to fail has created dozens of jobs and touched thousands of lives. The marriage that was supposed to crumble has become the foundation for a family built on love, support, and the courage to pursue dreams even when others can't see them. Sometimes the best response to a prediction of failure is not just to succeed, but to succeed so completely and joyfully that you transform the doubters into believers, critics into champions, and obstacles into opportunities. The champagne glass that shattered on our wedding reception floor was nothing compared to the barriers we've broken since then. And we're just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.